I enjoyed yesterday morning sessions, and I love what this organization is doing to inspire already idealistic and ambitious people who want to make a big difference in the world. I've always been drawn to causes. I've always been drawn to, as an entrepreneur, I was a social entrepreneur. I wanted to build things that not only were successful, but that actually made a positive impact in the lives of people. I think we live in a society where sometimes business and capitalism can kind of go too far in one direction without kind of looking at the greater good. And so I'm really drawn to things like this, where you guys together are going to make a huge difference in government and in the world. Just real quickly, I had never heard of StrengthsFinder until about a year ago. I'd been an entrepreneur for 22 years, started 7 companies. As Steve said, Ancestry.com was one of those. And we wanted to have a positive impact on the world and help everybody figure out who their relatives were, who their family, who their ancestors were, and kind of how they fit into the scheme of things. And so that was a great ride. All I knew about Gallup was that they were a polling company. And I think Gallup is the world's greatest brand for polling. I want to ask a question, because I'm learning all that I didn't know about what Gallup does. I want to ask you all a question today. By a show of hands, how many of you have ever heard of Don Clifton? Please raise your hand. Okay, so maybe 5% of you. Raise your hand if you've heard of Sigmund Freud. Okay, so Sigmund Freud is the great psychologist, the father of psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud, you could look at him and say, his concept was to ask people questions, to dig deep, and to find out what's wrong with them. Okay, I'm going to tell you about a man named Don Clifton, who has come to be one of my greatest heroes. He passed away 10 years ago, but in the 1950s, he was a young graduate student in psychology, and he said, psychology is all about figuring out what's wrong with people. Why don't I study what's right with people? Why don't I find all the successful people and figure out what made them successful? So for 50 years, literally, Don Clifton studied successful people and what made them that way. And for decades, he helped large corporations and schools to try to hire the right talent into their organization. So he would go into a bank and say, you've got 1,000 loan officers, I want to take the top 20%, the highest performers in your company culture, and I want to interview them and understand how are they wired, what do they think, what do they do, what makes them your top performers. So Don became a genius at selection. He would interview all these people, find all the common patterns that made them successful, and then he would devise a selection instrument that would help the company or the organization find more people like their top performers. Okay, so Don was a brilliant selection scientist. But every time he placed one person in a role, it meant that there was one person that won and got the role, and all the other people got turned away. And so, being the wonderful person that Don Clifton was, he tried to figure out, what can I do for the world that will help everybody to succeed, that won't just have a few winners and lots of losers, but some assessment, some tools, some developmental program that could help the entire world find out what they are best at and find a role for them. And so over a decade, Don worked and developed the StrengthsFinder assessment. And many of you have heard of it or taken it. StrengthsFinder has now been taken by nearly 9 million people. Most of the people learned about it by purchasing a book. There are several best-selling books. Now Discover Your Strengths was recently mentioned by Sheryl Sandberg, COO of Facebook, as the most important business book that she has read in a long time. And Facebook, for example, is a company culture that decided that StrengthsFinder was so powerful that every employee at Facebook takes StrengthsFinder and lists their top 5 strengths so for all their coworkers to see. StrengthsFinder is different from other theoretical or personality type assessments in that it was developed by researching tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, and then devising the categories and the themes as a result of those interviews. So one of the things, Don Clifton is not only the father of strength psychology, he was given a Lifetime Achievement Award by the American Psychological Association in 2002 as the father of strength psychology, but he's also the father of Gallup's current CEO, a man that I admire, a man named Jim Clifton, who is a brilliant leader. His number one strength is futuristic. He thinks in terms of decades, 50, 100 years from now. A couple years ago, Jim decided that Gallup would invest millions of dollars in not just doing polls in the United States. By the way, Gallup is an independent polling agency, never is hired by either political party. It does polling to understand the will of the people and to hear the voice of the people, and then to train and consult with business, government, education, and faith leaders about what the people are thinking. And so it's a great company mission, but Jim decided with his futuristic that we would poll the entire world. And so we now do polling in 162 countries around the world. We ask hundreds of questions. Many times we do it door to door, village to village, because a lot of people in the developing world don't have internet or phone. And so Gallup does this polling to try to inform world leaders about what people are thinking. It's a great boost to democracy worldwide. And one of the things that Gallup does is we study and we measure so many things in so many settings. We do a student poll every year. We interview hundreds of thousands of elementary school, middle school, and high school age students. And I want to share with you a statistic, and then I'll carry it over to the workplace, and just tell me what you think about this and how important it would be to buck this trend. Elementary school students, when they are surveyed, we find that 76% of them are engaged in school. They like going to school, they probably like their teacher, they like what they're learning, they're engaged. Their eyes are open and they've got energy around learning. By middle school, it drops to 61%. By high school, it drops to 41%. When you look at the American workplace, Gallup just released a massive 60-page report called The State of the American Workplace. If you survey people in the workplace to find out if they're engaged at work, the number is 30%. What's wrong with this picture? Instead of life becoming more and more exciting and energizing as you discover your talents and what you can do, it's becoming the opposite. It's becoming, we're all trying to be mass-produced. We're all, standardized testing. We all need to be competent at this, and this. And if you're not competent at something, you should double down and focus more of your attention and energy. You got to be good at math. You got to be good at science. You got to be good at writing. We're actually trying to make everybody the same and good at everything. But in reality, we're not wired that way. And so our psychological assessments help you discover the naturally occurring patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that you can productively apply. We don't tell you if you have dancing talent or singing talent or if you can throw a football 50 yards. That's not the kind of talent we're talking about. What we're saying is that every one of you has latent talents based on your naturally occurring patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving, and that if you learn what those are and you understand the concepts and the language and you can talk to your coworkers and your managers and your partners about what your strengths are, you can craft a role for yourself that allows you to be engaged at work every day. Let me give you a couple of statistics. We study workplace engagement, as I said, and we also study managers and how good managers are or how poor managers are. And what we found that is astonishing is that if you have a manager that ignores you, and unfortunately, I confess, my strengths are all in the strategic thinking realm. I was not a people person in the sense that I couldn't wait to interview my employees and have my one-on-ones with them and spend time in group meetings and communicate with all my people. I would rather be in my room researching, exploring, inventing. Okay, that was my strength. And it turns out that I wasn't a great manager. So in all of my companies that I founded, within a year or two, I hired a CEO to run the company, to manage the team. And I got to do what I was best at. And I didn't understand why I was going through this, but now that I took StrengthsFinder a year ago, it explained all of my past successes and all of my past failures. And so anyway, today, if you have a manager that ignores you, doesn't ever want to talk to you, doesn't want to meet with you, doesn't respond to you, there's a 40% chance you will be, quote, actively disengaged on the job. This is not just that your heart and soul isn't in the job. This is you're actively disengaged, higher absenteeism, more accidents, a lot of complaints, you're spreading negativism around the office because you hate your job and you don't want to be there. So ignoring managers are the worst type of managers. If a manager gives you negative feedback, at least they're giving you some feedback, but there's still a 22% chance that you will be actively disengaged at work. Managers make an enormous amount of difference in your daily life and in your career. If a manager, and this is what Gallup's strengths movement is all about, if a manager will acknowledge what your strengths are and give you strengths-based feedback and say, Angela, you're a great learner. I want you to do more of this and this and this. John, you're a great communicator. We want to give you a chance to showcase that in this and this and this role. If they craft your role and give you feedback, there's only a 1% chance that you will be actively disengaged at work. And there's a 60% chance that you will be fully engaged at work, which is way higher than the average of 30. So managers make an enormous amount of difference. What I'm trying to do, I could be doing a lot of different things here in Washington, D.C. I was thinking about starting another company. I met Gallup. I took StrengthsFinder. I was blown away by what it taught me about myself. And I wished I had known of this tool so that every employee and partner that I ever worked with could have taken StrengthsFinder so that I could have had a way to understand the differences between me and them and the role that they should take versus the role that I should take. My goal now is to lead the worldwide Gallup Strengths movement, to encourage people to not just take the assessment and be done with it, but to take the assessment, learn more about it, have conversations, manage people around strengths, make it a part of your organizational culture. We already have dozens of government agencies that have had somewhere between 10 and 50% of the employees take StrengthsFinder, but if you take it and then put it on the shelf, if it doesn't make a difference in what your role is day to day, then it doesn't really transform the world. Don Clifton once drove past a cemetery while he was developing StrengthsFinder, and he stopped and he parked, and the colleague of his that was in the car with him said, "Did you know someone that was buried here?" And he said, "No, but I'm just pausing to think about all the people that are buried there who never knew while they were alive what their strengths were and what they could be excellent at." So my job is to make sure that the world knows who Don Clifton is and that 1 billion people in the world get to know what their strengths are so that they can be the best person possible and live the most successful and fulfilling life that they can. I hope you'll join me in helping the Strengths movement move forward. Thank you.